I understand political theology as a method of analysis. There are some people who think of political theology as a study of the role of politics in religion. And for me, I understand political theology to be a theological reflection on power. There's always, you could say, questions of sovereignty involved in power, and where does sovereignty come from? And so for me, political theology is a way of analyzing power and also scrutinizing it, and where perhaps it has distorted understandings of sovereignty. Does sovereignty as a gift from God to humans and kind of working through power? Does power exist in order to ensure the common good for all peoples in a particular polity, in a particular society? Or does power exist for a particular group to assert their own interests and to advance their own glory? And so, you can have very distorted uses and abuses of power. And so political theology exists not only to analyze the theological character of power, but also to scrutinize it and sometimes to critique it. It's basically important for Muslims and Christians to talk about this because while our experience of the other is very much on the local level, right? This is where we really know one another when we encounter one another in person, in flesh and blood. But at the same time, politics can draw us into suspicions of one another and even hostility. Christians might be in one country, but they're talking about the persecution of Christians in another, and they bring that to their local encounter. And likewise, Muslims might live in a particular country and they hear about persecutions of Muslims in other countries, and they bring that to their local encounter. And so it's really important for us, Muslims and Christians together, to be aware of this, because there are so many forces out there that want us to look at one another as enemies. And in my experience, that doesn't come as a product of the local encounter. It only comes when we allow our local encounter to be shaped or limited or even impoverished by these bigger battles and conflicts on the global stage. And not that we should ignore those, but just to get a greater awareness of what it is that's shaping the way we interact and think about one another. And so that in itself is a real reason for us to think about political theology as a place for us to think deeply about who we are together before God. I guess one important point is to think more critically about power. You have thinkers in the Christian tradition, and you have thinkers in the Muslim tradition. And in general, the major thinkers have realized that it's not possible to bring about a heavenly order on earth, because when you try to do that, you have to exclude people who don't fit into the qualities of that heavenly order, and you might even have to eliminate them. Both traditions have recognized that the world is limited, and we have to live within these limitations. And so therefore, power can't be the agent of a heavenly order. We need power to ensure the common good, to maintain order, to suppress crime and chaos so that we can all flourish. But there are moments in history where we see leaders trying to, as it were, claim a certain role for themselves, almost as a mortal god. You see this sometimes in a secular way with, Nazi Germany. You can also see this in recent formulations of the caliphate. Is the caliphate something where everyone has the freedom to worship God? Or is the caliphate a place where we glorify a particular person as God's specially ordained caliph. And you see this tension going all the way back to the Bible, right? Is the promised land a place where the Israelites are to go and worship God freely, or is it the place for a particular political institution to be glorified and to be associated in a special way with Yahweh? And whenever that happened, prophets would have to come along and tell the kings, it's not about you, it's about the worship of Yahweh. And so I think we Muslims and Christians, we have a lot to learn from each other in that sense, and it's really vital because like I said, there are too many forces out there trying to get us to look at each other as enemies. And whether it's St. Augustine in the 4th, 5th century who is saying, look, we can't equate imperial glory with God's glory. We need the emperor to kind of maintain order and suppress crime so that we can all flourish. Or whether it's Tajuddin Subki in the 14th century, in the Mamluk period, where he's criticizing this idea of siyasa, of political power, and saying, yeah, we need it, but it doesn't mean you can go and take whatever you want from the peasants. And it doesn't mean, you can act harshly because, it seems in his day, some of the princes of the Mamluk dynasty were trying to show that they were strong rulers when, in fact, they were just treating people harshly. And so he wanted to make sure, don't confuse harsh treatment of the peasants with strong rule. So, I guess I see this as a vital space for conversation.